Hey, what's up everybody? This is Keen Sauce and I've come back with another basic tutorial video to follow up the first tutorial video that we did, which was basically just a quick guide on setting up the user interface and keybinds. So we're going to follow that up, and today's topic is going to be dealing with the global cooldown, which is very important when you try to you want to cast spells in succession, i.e. a rotation. Now I'm not going to get into rotations because they differ depending on play style and class, and I'm never going to say, oh, there's a certain rotation you should always use. If you want more information on rotations, I would recommend going to the server forums on the SWTOR.com website. Or not the server forums, sorry, the class forums. The class forums will generally list or detailed questions as to different specs and what spells you want to be using and what times. This is really just going to go behind more of the mechanics of it. So you can see I have my Juggernaut here, and I have my Warzone trading dummy, which I'll be using to demonstrate some of the finer points about the global cooldown. So before we begin this, I just want to go back to a little bit of a review from the first tutorial we did, which is about setting up your user interface and hotkeying. And the main thing I want to get over from the user interface is obviously, you want to have your setup where you can see your spells. And you can see most people have them in the middle of the screen. Some people have them on the sides or whatnot, but my toolbars 1 and 2 reside right there. And the next thing that you want to make sure that you have up is, and go to your preferences, go to user interface, is your cooldown text. So cooldown settings, always show your cooldown text. And text size, it just basically means how large you want it to show up. And it'll show you cooldown 3, so I have a dark cooldown with a dark overlay, that's fine. Style 1 is a bright cooldown with a dark overlay. All told, they're basically going to look fairly similar, but you just want to make sure that you recognize it. And then tenths of a second just means how many seconds before it counts down in terms of tenths. So if you have 1 second left and you're antsy and you're like, oh my god, I want to be able to cast this, but I need to know within 0.5 of a second whether I can or not. That's what you have here. You can bring it up to 10, but 2 seconds is more than enough time. So you can do this however you want. The main thing is the show flash. So flash means when you're able to cast that spell. And just make sure you have the text showing. That's really important. So we'll go back into just the regular layout. So you see I have some spells here. I'm not going to really go into it too much, but let's just say every spell that's on this toolbar I have hotkey. So the hotkey just means that when I want to cast it, I press it. Now, why does the global cooldown or cooldowns in general, how does that affect it? Well, let's just say if I wanted to cast 5 spells, well, alright, that means I cast 5 spells. I should be able to press 5 buttons. Let me press 5 buttons right now, and let's see if I cast 5 spells. No. I only got 3 spells off while pressing 5 spells. I did a leap, I tried to do a Sundering Strike, I did smash, I tried to do an overhead slash, and I tried to do a blade storm. Well, what happened, right? I pressed 5 buttons, I only got 3 spells out. Well, even though all these spells, and you'll see, they're not channeled, they're all instant, meaning the second you cast them, you should be able to execute that spell. Well, even though it's instant, it still has to respect the global cooldown, meaning, let's just start with your opener, which is always going to be Force Leap in most cases for a Juggernaut. So you can see there's a little bit of a delay in terms of when I can cast the next spell. You can see there was a big flash overlay, which was the global cooldown overlay upon all my spells, meaning I won't be able to cast another spell until the global cooldown is finished running. So let's do this again. So I'm going to do Force Leap, and then we're just going to look at the spells and see that GCD overlay. So boom, and then there, a flash, so I can cast my next spell. So why do we need to recognize that? Well, we need to recognize that so that we know that when we press the next spell or the next key that we want to cast, that it's going to be cast. If you try pressing that spell while the global cooldown overlay is running, you will not be able to execute that spell. There are certain exceptions for certain spells that ignore the global cooldown. We'll get into that a little bit later. I don't think I'll even be able to cast it unless I get dodged or parried. A dodged parry attack on the training dummy. But so let's say we want to do the same thing. I'm going to try to cast Force Leap into a Sundering Strike. I'm just gonna keep it instant. Let's just do that. So Sundering Strike. Let's try to get 5 spells out. But this time, instead of just pressing five buttons, I'm actually gonna mentally take into account the GCD, which takes about a little less than a second, and then let's see if we can get all those 5 spells out. So boom, boom, and I'm just waiting. Okay, so that was 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, that was 4 spells. The point being, I actually was looking at my GCD counter to see, alright, at what point can I press the next button to execute the next spell, as opposed to just repeatedly pressing that spell in order to. So I don't know, maybe you can hear it, but let's just say I wanted to wait until that spell got cast. There are a bunch of ways you can do it. So you can, as I did in that previous case, just wait until the GCD is done before pressing it, or you can repeatedly press it until it gets executed and then move on to the next spell. That's called spamming. If you have a lot of actions per minute or APM, go play StarCraft or spam. Or if you're super elite with your timing, then go for it. So I'm going to try to do the same. I'm going to try to do 5 spells again. Actually, I'm going to open with my saber throw. But I'm going to do it spamming this time. So it says not ready yet, and that's basically the GCD telling me that it's not ready yet. So alright, I got out probably 5 or 6 spells, but I probably pressed the keyboard about 10 times. The important thing is you don't want to move on to the next spell in your rotation or succession until the current spell that you are spamming or pressing is actually cast. If you do, then you might miss actually casting that spell. And that's called, basically, you were not waiting for the global cooldown before actually attempting to cast the next spell. And it's a very subtle difference, but it's something that if you play this game a lot, you want to make sure that you're actually executing properly so that you can get the most out of your time. Now, there are certain spells that also ignore the global cooldown, and they'll say that. They'll say that on the description. So I actually have my Mass Over Riposte, which is a great spell because it ignores their shoulder cannon for your power attacks does that. I believe Gore does it as well. And I might be missing 1 or 2, but again, it'll always say in the spell description whether it can or not. So what is so great about spells that ignore the global cooldown? Well, they basically, when it ignores the global cooldown, it means it will be cast as soon as you press it. So it just basically, it's the speed of your execution in that case. A lot of times you'll find when you use a spell that ignores the global cooldown in the midst of your rotation, you might actually get, let's say, 2 spells cast in the time it takes to cast 1 spell. What does that mean? Well, the spell that ignores the global cooldown, in this case Riposte, is going to be instant. And I don't mean instant in the terms of the definition of the spell being instant. I mean the second you press it, you will be casting it. So let's see if this Warzone training dummy can dodge any of my attacks, and then I can get a Riposte up. So I'm basically just waiting till I can get it, the effective, and I just have to keep attacking it until it dodges me. Dodge me, dang it. I said dodge me. Damn you, training dummy, why don't you have any dodge abilities? I know it's not going to parry me, so. Oh man. Maybe I don't understand the training dummy that well. Alright. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get an opportunity to cast it. If you do, though, I mean, God, I wish there was a better. Oh, you know what? I can probably log on to my PT. Let's do that. Let's do that. I'm in combat. Shut up. So before I move on to actually demonstrating spells that ignore the global cooldown, I just want to go over again really the importance of knowing the global cooldown, so that a lot of times when you first come into this game, you're going to be, for lack of a better term, mashing buttons expecting the spells to come out. Just know that you have to wait until you can actually cast that spell before you can cast it, even if it is instant. And that means waiting for the global cooldown to finish its timer. There are also certain abilities that you can use that will increase your Alacrity. Alacrity will reduce your global cooldown as well. And we can see that. So let's just go to Alacrity. So global cooldown speed bonus. So yeah, if you have a lot of Alacrity, it'll marginally increase it so that you can actually cast more spells in succession. You'll often hear me saying my biggest enemy is the global cooldown because I'm pressing a lot of buttons and I'm only getting a certain amount of spells cast in that time. So let's get on to a tune that I know has a spell that ignores a global cooldown. I mentioned before, Shoulder Cannon does it. So I'll show you one of the benefits of spells that do ignore it, and that you'll be able to get multiple spells out in slightly less amount of time, which is great. I mean, if you can cast 5 spells in the time it normally is to cast 4, you're actually doing more in that allotted time. Ideally, you'd love it so that every spell you cast ignore the global cooldown, but that would just mean your animations would be constantly going crazy. And I think, you know, the reasons they have it in place is so that you can actually see the animation complete before you do the next spell. Alright, so let's go on to my ship, and then on to my training dummy. And this will be the last part of the tutorial as far as just demonstrating spells that ignore the global cooldown. Alright, SSD, do your work. This is fun. Nice load screen, huh? Haven't seen this about 1,000,000 times. It's okay. Alright, so my training dummy is down here. Right. So, Shoulder Cannon, and it says loading and launching does not respect the global cooldown. So I'm just going to load up 4 really quickly. And you can load it without, the load itself doesn't, so you can see when I pressed it, there was no flash overlay, and that's because it's pretty much instant. So alright, let's what am I, pyro on this loser? Alright. So boom. Actually let me alright. So I'm gonna do a rocket punch into a shoulder cannon into a flame burst, and I'm gonna show you how I can cast those 3 spells in the time it takes 2. So alright, I don't know, it's very subtle, but shoulder cannon, there's no overlay on any other spell. It's just on shoulder cannon. So that's great in that I'm not even, I'll tell you what, I won't even do an opener. I'm just going to do shoulder cannon into flame burst. So 2 spells, and I pressed them right in quick succession of the 2, and it basically, you saw there was no flash overlay that represented the global cooldown. That really helps in that, like I said, you're basically getting that extra spell in place without having the time to actually cast it. So let's try it again. Rocket punch, shoulder cannon into flame burst. Oh, did that actually work? No, it didn't work. Probably because I suck. Now I have to wait for it to cool down. But anyways, you get the gist of it. There are certain spells that basically the second you cast them, you can cast the next spell that you want to cast, and you won't have to respect the global cooldown in that case. Riposte, Gore, and Shoulder Cannon are just 3 examples of that. In the meantime, though, without getting into too much into the spells that don't respect it, let's just worry about the 99% of spells that do respect it. Just know that there's that slight pause before you can actually execute the next spell. And you always want to have economy of movement so that you're not wasting your time by spamming, unless you know you're going to cast it like Rail Shot I normally would cast. And also that you're not missing spells in your rotation because you're maybe pressing too many spells in succession without actually waiting for the cooldown to finish. So that pretty much finishes a basic description of it. You can also look at how the rotation will affect it, and the best way to, I guess, get comfortable with the global cooldown is simply practice. You can practice in PvE, you can practice on your training dummy, you can practice in PvP. The key is you just want to know mentally, alright, I'm executing these spells, I want to see them all come out, I don't want to skip a spell in my execution, and I want to get used to my timing. So that's pretty much been this version of the tutorial. We're going to work on some other stuff later, but this was just a quick and dirty explanation as far as execution of mechanics goes. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found it helpful. Thanks a lot, and peace out.